There seem to be a lot of people that feel that Pixar need to stick with original ideas and stray away from all these sequels they're doing. Even as someone who isn't a massive fan of sequels, I think that's a bit too much of a generalization. However, their performance in 2017 would certainly support that idea. Coco, while not one of Pixar's truly great films, is still a vast improvement on the bland, forgettable film that was Cars 3. It's another one of those Pixar films that aren't so much about the story of the characters it focuses on, but rather the world and culture they live in. It's also another one that centers around the characters' passion and their attempt to follow their dream in the face of disapproval from everyone around them. So the setup is something that we've seen before, coupled with the framing device of the Day of the Dead celebration, making people make the obvious comparison to the Book of Life, and there was a real chance of this being as unoriginal as any of the sequels Pixar have been making over the last few years. However, the film does an excellent job in the first 10 minutes of making you forget that you've heard the story before with its presentation, showing off some of the wonderful elements of Mexican culture and giving you some fantastic details of the community based around the Day of the Dead celebrations. Keep in mind, this is before the main character Miguel has even entered the major world in which the adventure really takes place. Now, with the film taking many twists and turns, there is a danger of the film either becoming slightly convoluted or just simply predictable, and it does suffer from the latter problem on some level, as well as opening up certain questions about character behaviour and manipulative plot elements, which I will talk about more when I get into spoilers. But the world they've created is so engaging that it's quite easy to forget about the story at times. It kind of reminded me of an Edgar Wright film in that sense. Maybe Pixar should hire him to write for them sometime. Now, as much as I love Pixar, one slight issue I've often had with their films is the structure of their third acts. They seem to have a habit of making it look like things are about to get resolved, only for something to happen at the last second that means things have to keep going for a bit longer. RC running out of batteries and the match being blown out in Toy Story, the rain in A Bug's Life, Dory being left behind in Finding Dory, or Syndrome kidnapping Jack Jack in The Incredibles. I don't mind any of these sequences, in fact I love some of them. It's just a lot of the time these sequences don't really serve the plot other than to keep things going and add a bit more runtime to the film. It just comes across as a bit tacked on at the last minute, like someone ran into the writer's room and said, "Hey, this is a great climax we got, but what if we do this as well?" And you might be justified in asking, what's wrong with that? The whole film was probably written like that. Well, the problem is I can tell it was written like that. It's a bit like watching a puppet show and being able to see the strings. Anytime I can tell how or why something is written a certain way, it takes me out of the experience of the film a little bit. Having said all that, I did really like the climax. It was a satisfying resolution for the main characters and also had a few touching moments. It's just the way it was structured that threw me off a bit, especially since this is a recurring problem in Pixar's films. Now I'm going to go into spoilers, so don't continue to watch if you've not seen the film yet. Do go see it though. So early on, I found it a bit odd that, despite the entire family business having been started after Coco's father abandoned them, they still have a photo of him on the ofrenda, just with his face removed. Like, were there no pictures of just Coco and her mother taken after he left? It also seemed odd to me that we weren't told the name of Coco's father. I mean, they know he loved music, Coco remembers him, and they even have a photo of him, but they still don't know his name? It all seemed like a lot of convenient withholding of information, just to give us a dramatic reveal later on. So of course, once we were told about this great musician, Ernesto, that Miguel idolizes, I'm thinking, well gee, I wonder who this musician that abandoned Miguel's family might be. But to my pleasant surprise, we're actually told that fairly soon after being introduced to Ernesto, which kind of suggested to me that you were actually supposed to guess that. It was kind of like a fake-out twist to make you think you had the film pegged, when in fact the truth was something far less telegraphed. But the downside to this is it basically leaves you waiting in anticipation for whatever the real twist is. I assumed it would be to do with the reason why Ernesto abandoned his family, and since that's the whole reason Miguel's family hated music, I also wondered if that would be the reason for Miguel's adventure. Maybe he would find out the full story as to why Ernesto never came home. But as it turns out, Miguel doesn't seem too bothered about that, and in fact, he doesn't even choose to visit the Land of the Dead. He's forced to because of the age-old frigulous task of finding a certain person before a certain time, or he will be doomed for all eternity, I guess, because you can't say die in a kid's film. I don't understand why all these kinds of films resort to this ticking clock mechanic, but I did think it was pretty creative how more and more of his body disappeared to show how much time he had left. I also get the need to raise the stakes for something like this, but here's the problem. We see pretty soon after he enters the Land of the Dead that Imelda, his great-great-grandmother, is willing to give him the opportunity to leave. Miguel just doesn't want it because it means never being able to play music again, which for a time seems believable since Miguel has the option of using Ernesto, who of course wouldn't have the no music condition. But as it gets closer to the deadline, it starts to become a bit ridiculous. Would Miguel really rather die than go back to the land of the living, unable to ever play music? And would Imelda really rather Miguel die than allow him to go back to the land of the living, able to play music? It also removes a lot of the tension from the climax when you know how easily they could have resolved things. The last thing I want to talk about is the twists in the latter part of the film, of which there are two, and both were fairly unexpected to be fair. But they still left me asking a few questions. The first is a type of twist that's starting to crop up in a lot of Disney films lately: the surprise bad guy. Now the twist itself is quite good. Ernesto stole all of the songs from his partner Hector and passed them off as his own and poisoned him to stop him from telling anyone. One of those ends justify the means bad guy plots, where they don't really feel like they've done anything bad, and therefore it makes sense that they wouldn't have seemed like a bad person at first. The issue for me is the way it was revealed. Ernesto apparently made a movie documenting this act exactly as it happened. He just pretends it's a work of fiction, and it's only because Miguel recognizes a line from the movie that he's able to work out that this might have really happened. This seems like a bit of a stretch for Miguel to assume this, but more importantly, why would Ernesto risk being exposed like this? It never occurred to him that someone might connect the dots and think that what he's doing in the movie might have really happened? But this was still kind of interesting at the same time. The main character's great-great-grandfather, the person he'd previously idolized, wasn't actually a good person. It's a kind of Darth Vader is Luke's father twist. A person being good doesn't always mean their relatives were good as well, and vice versa. Which of course brings me on to the second twist, which completely shatters this interesting idea. Because it turns out Hector is actually his great-great-grandfather, and he is a good person, and he actually wrote all of the songs that Miguel loves. So yeah, never mind about all that, the good guys are all related again. That really disappointed me, and it also opens up a few questions. How did no one else know who wrote Hector's songs? Imelda and Coco clearly knew Hector was the man who left them, but they never mentioned exactly who he was to any later generations. Miguel actually meets Imelda and Hector in the Land of the Dead in fairly quick succession. But of course, the two of them don't actually cross paths until after we've learned the truth. So after all that ranting, you might think I hate this film, and I really don't. These are all just things that keep it from being a masterpiece. I still love the visual style with the skeletons having actual facial expressions, and the quite creative idea of the skeletons really being a lingering memory that disappears when no one alive remembers them. It's still a great achievement, and the world it creates alone is worth the price of admission.